You're listening to The Manning Report with your host, James David Manning. The news behind the headlines.
Scaramucci, remember Scaramucci? He was the former Speaker Communications Director, is no longer on the Trump train. Scaramucci has actually jumped off of the Trump train. You know, I said to you some time ago that we created the Trump train song here, right here in this studio was the Trump train song created. And that song was played at many of Tribulation's Trump presidential campaign rallies as he was running for the president. But I got a new song, and it's called Get Off the Trump Train. And it goes a little something like this. Get off the Trump train before you fall. Get off the Trump train, one and all. Get off the Trump train. It's not too late. Get off the Trump train before you seal your fate. Get off that Trump train. And Scaramucci has gotten off that Trump train. Thank God that somebody somewhere has enough backbone to realize the rhetoric of this idiot that you call a president, and he has stated that he will no longer support Tribulation Trump. But I want you to hear it straight out of Scaramucci's mouth. So let's run that clip, and I'll be back with more.
With this Axios interview, you compared the president to Chernobyl, something of a nuclear meltdown, and then you went on to say a couple more weeks like this, and Country Over Party is going to require the Republicans to replace the top of the ticket in 2020. A couple more weeks like this, you say. A couple more weeks like what?
Well, the last time I was in this chair with you, John, we were talking about the racially charged rhetoric that led to a whole Twitter nonsense from the president, and obviously he then left to go to the two shooting areas. And so now he comes back from the two shooting areas. That was like a total catastrophe because the only thing he was doing in those areas was talking about himself and praising himself and crowd sizes. And so it just, one day after the next, it gets worse and worse and worse. And in the meantime, as you know, in a chair like this or inside your studio or elsewhere, you know, I got fired 2 years ago and have tried to stay very loyal to him and very loyal to the agenda because I think the policies are very, very good for the American people. But the rhetoric is so charged and so divisive that we have to all just take a step back now and say, what are we doing actually? So one thing that I find reprehensible, and the president continues to do this, and I think what will end up happening is sound and reasonably minded men and women in the Republican Party will say, wait a minute, we can't do this. He is giving people a license to hate, to provide a source of anger, to go after each other, and he does it on his Twitter account. So let's just stop for a second and think about this. We ignore it, but he goes after people personally. Going after me personally, no problem. I'm a big boy. I can take it. Donnie Deutsch can take it. But he goes after individuals as the president of the United States on his Twitter account, okay, which incites hate, which incites death threats. I mean, at some point, I think the people in my party will have to look at all this stuff and stop being anesthetized to it and say, hey, what are we doing? The policies are great, many of them. The trade war thing is likely going to end up in an unexpected outcome. We can talk about that if you want. But lastly, how are we all tolerating this? So to me, I'm just saying, last week, arguably one of the worst weeks in his presidency. And again, I'm not talking about things that happened to him politically from a legislation point of view or things like that, but just from the way he's acting as a human being. So to me, a couple more weeks like this, I really do believe there will be a groundswell in the party where people say, hey, the policies are great, but you're setting us up the way Jimmy Carter set up the Democratic Party, where they went into the wilderness for 40 years. So those are my opinions. I'm very proud to state them. And, listen, I mean, if you saw the Chernobyl series, it did not end well. So we're in the first 2 episodes now let's see how this thing unfolds.
You are no longer an active.
Smart-minded
You are no
people.
longer, Anthony. I just don't want to pass this by. So you are no longer an active supporter of President Trump and his re-election bid.
Yeah, I think that's pretty obvious from over the weekend. I mean, the guy's actually dissembling a little bit. He's sounding more and more nonsensical. And, we're sort of anesthetized to it, and people inside are watching, oh, yeah, that's just President Trump. Just let him act like that. You're fracturing the institutions and all of the things that the country stands for. So that's not worth the economic policy.
Now, you heard straight from Scaramucci's mouth as he stated the reasons as to why he no longer will support Tribulation Trump. And I thought he said something very interesting in the many statements that he made. One of the things he said, and I wrote it down here, was he said that anyone who are sound and reasonably minded people, anyone will not stand for the rhetoric or the statements that have been stated by Tribulation Trump, which means to say, in other words, as we talk about listening to what people don't say, he means that anybody who can think reasonably and logically and who is well mentally will stand or continue to support Tribulation Trump. So what it says in essence is that those people who continue to support Tribulation Trump are not reasonable, they are not sound, they are not well mentally. Because in essence, that's what he is really saying. And so I say kudos to Scaramucci for making a public announcement that he will no longer support Tribulation Trump. Get off of the Trump train. Again, it is not too late. Scaramucci just did it, and he did it openly and publicly before the world to see. You too can do the same thing. There is no way that you can continue to support a man if you're sound and if you're reasonable, as Scaramucci stated. If you have the right frame of mind, there's no way that you can continue to support Tribulation Trump. Now, along with Scaramucci jumping off the Trump train, the other reasons as to why you should not support Tribulation Trump, or why when we talk about Tribulation Trump and how mentally unstable he is, because he is completely mentally unstable. Last week, he visited the hospitals both in El Paso, Texas and Dayton, Ohio. And when he went to the hospital in El Paso, Texas, the purpose of his visit was to go and to console the victims who were injured or shot at this tragic event. And while he was at the hospital, you would think that being presidential, his focus would be on the victims, but no, it wasn't. It was on something else. Can you guess what his focus was on? Well, let's watch this clip and I'll be back with more remarks.
I was here 3 months ago. We made a speech, and we had what was the name of the arena? That place was packed, right?
I was front row.
Right? The judges have respected
I was front row.
What was the name?
I was front row in there.
Oh, good. Come here, man. That was some crowd.
Thank you for
And we had twice the number outside. And then you had this crazy Beto. Beto had like 400 people in a parking lot. They said his crowd was wonderful.
Now here Tribulation Trump is standing in a hospital speaking to other hospital workers, and his focus is not on the victims. His focus is on crowd size and how many people were at the place to see him. Then he went on to talk about Beto O'Rourke and that he only had 400 people. There's something completely wrong with a person who is obsessed with size. And as we speak about Tribulation Trump, size is all that matters to him, how big a crowd is, how big the poll numbers were. And obviously, you would think that he is trying to compensate for something now. I'm not going to go down that road, but I'll leave it in your hands. What do you think is going on with him as he speaks about, as he focuses on time and time again, the size of an audience? And there were thousands of people out there waiting to greet me and praise me. So again, as I state, Tribulation Trump, mentally unfit. What does that say about you who follow him? Those of you who support Tribulation Trump. It is obvious to those of us who can see things in a reasonable and logical manner, that Tribulation Trump is not well. And as you have heard Pastor Manning state many times, that he is going to commit suicide. The day is going to come where he is going to commit suicide. What are you, Trump supporters, going to do at that time? You know, with this Jeffrey Epstein suicide, and though the news has stated that he was unresponsive and that he committed suicide, they're now going into the investigation and trying to see if there are other foul play that went into the death of Jeffrey Epstein. And so as we look at all of this, you know, there are so many people making so many kinds of speculations as to really what took place, but we don't actually know. But when Tribulation Trump actually commits suicide, what are the Trump supporters going to do then? Are they going to make all kinds of speculations and conspiracy theories as Tribulation Trump has done so many times? I'm sure that they will. And as we talk about conspiracy theories, how many conspiracy theories has Tribulation Trump made during the course of his presidential campaign into his presidency? There are so many conspiracies that have come out. And the latest conspiracy is that the Clintons have something to do with the death of Jeffrey Epstein. He's actually pushing that the Clintons have something to do with this man's death. And so we sit here and we witness all of this. Again, sometimes it is hard to believe that we are actually living in this day and time watching the so-called president of the United States repeatedly make all of these lies, repeatedly come up with these ridiculous conspiracy theories, and yet people still support him. I want you to see a list of the theories that Tribulation Trump and his supporters has made throughout the years. Let's roll that clip.
President Trump has reacted to Epstein's death in what is sadly a very unsurprising way. He is spreading a conspiracy theory that the Clintons had Epstein killed. Let that sink in. This would be like Gerald Ford or Jimmy Carter or Ronald Reagan claiming that LBJ had Kennedy killed. Nonetheless, because this is Donald Trump, this is what we've come to expect. Because this isn't the first, no, it's not the second or even the third time the president has made baseless claims without regard for the consequences of his rhetoric. He's also suggested Senator Ted Cruz's dad was involved in JFK's assassination, that Justice Antonin Scalia was murdered because a pillow was found over his face, that Joe Scarborough may have been involved in his intern's death, that there was something fishy about the suicide of Vince Foster, a former Clinton aide. Don't forget, he started the birther movement. He went so far as to offer President Obama $5 million for his college records and passport. Trump raised questions about Senator Marco Rubio's eligibility to be president because his parents were not born in the U.S. Trump conveniently ignored the fact that his own mother wasn't born in the U.S. Trump also raised similar eligibility questions about Senator Ted Cruz because he was born in Canada. President Trump went on to claim that President Obama wiretapped Trump Tower. His own Justice Department publicly said this did not happen. Trump claimed he saw and read about Muslim Americans celebrating on 9/11. Absolutely no footage or news articles have ever been found to support this. He said he lost the popular vote because millions of people voted illegally. A commission he put together to find this widespread fraud never found any. He's argued that global warming is a hoax created by the Chinese. The president leaves out that he sought to build a seawall at his Scottish golf course to, quote, protect from global warming and its effects. He claims vaccines cause autism and that noise from windmills can cause cancer. He's denied that 3,000 people died in Puerto Rico due to Hurricane Maria. And the president has adamantly denied that Russia interfered in the 2016 election.
Tribulation Trump has promoted 15 conspiracy theories. Now, Trump supporters will say, of course, all of this is fake news, but did we make this up? Are we the ones who made up these conspiracies, or did you hear Tribulation Trump actually state these conspiracies, whether through recorded speech or through his tweets? Because we can always pull those clips and tweets up, you know. So here we go again. talking about the so-called president of the United States. And again, I say, it's one thing to say that Tribulation Trump is unstable and is actually ill mentally. We know that to be true. It's one thing again to say that Tribulation Trump is a continual liar, and that he doesn't study, that he doesn't read, that he just speaks brutally whatever he wants to say. That's another thing. We all know about Tribulation Trump. We know the kind of man that he is. The question is, the people who support Tribulation Trump, what does that say about you? What does it say about a person who would support someone who continually lies? A person who would support someone who is mentally ill? A person who would support someone who, as you just saw, promote conspiracy theories with absolutely no tangible proof whatsoever? And now again, his latest conspiracy is that the Clintons, they are the ones who have something to do, or they are the ones who pushed or dealt with Jeffrey Epstein and his so-called suicide. It's not really suicide. The Clintons did it. But yet there are people who support this man after he makes such a ridiculous claim. So what does that say about you? Scaramucci jumped off. And I said to you before, get off the Trump train. It's not too late to get off that Trump train. And like Scaramucci, I would say get off now.
This is a bit of a news blog we do, looking at spiritual wickedness in high places for the most part, making some observations about it and giving people a biblical foundation to the way of interpreting, rather than have Sean Hannity or Laura Ingraham or Janine Pirro or Anderson Cooper or Rachel Maddow or Don Lemon, Rush Limbaugh interpret what's going on in the world. You come to me and I'll tell you based on what the Word of God says. They'll just give you their worldly, sinful view. But the Manning Report will tell you what God has said, whether to say yea or nay, whether to go or to stay. You'll be led by the word of Almighty God. Come to the Manning Report on a daily basis to interpret the spiritual wickedness in high places, because there's plenty of it that's going on. And so I'm the Lord's servant, James David Righteous Rebel Manning, and I'm here to serve you with news and information.